Everybody, we are live with episode 128 of After Office Hours. I am pitching in for our lovely host, Carrie Dills, who is sick this evening or party too hard on New Year's Eve. We're just not sure. Joining me is Morten Rand Hendrickson. Morten, you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Hello. Oh, you want me to say something, or do you want?
Perfect. Thanks. Help
me. I'm Morten. I am a guy who does a lot of stuff about WordPress and with WordPress and everything. I work for LinkedIn, which used to be lynda.com, and now I'm LinkedIn Learning and make courses. So if you're on the internet a lot, you may have seen me talk about WordPress or web design or something like that. And I crash podcasts every once in a while.
Excellent. Little bit of housekeeping tonight. We need to thank our sponsor, WP Engine. WP Engine offers free staging for friends of Office Hours FM. They are giving away free accounts to stage client sites to verified freelancers and agencies. You're even allowed to use the free staging for clients who don't want to host on WP Engine, although why they wouldn't is beyond me. With automated migrations, transferable installs, and a suite of developer tools, you'll love staging sites and hosting them with WP Engine. So thanks, WP Engine. We really appreciate you making this episode of the podcast possible. So today we are kind of kicking off the start to the new year. It's 2017. We made it through 2016. So we're going to chit chat as we always do. Morten, why don't you talk a little bit about what you've been up to?
Well, I'm currently trying to figure out new things to do with the WP API or REST API or whatever it is we're calling it now. Now that it's become a core feature in WordPress, it's time for people to start using it in production. And, you know, that's why I'm doing it. So I'm right now building a new course that's going to be part of a series of courses on the WordPress API to show people how to build resilient websites that utilize the API without relying solely on JavaScript front end.
Well, this fascinates me because while I have a general understanding of the REST API, the use cases have not, haven't really gelled with me.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some examples of what you would do with this. What kind of applications are there for it? So
if you kind of have to start by thinking about what the REST API is and why it's different from how WordPress works itself. So if you're used to building themes or plugins, you know, anytime you want to grab content out of the database and put it on the front end somewhere, you need to run some sort of WordPress function, right? That goes inside your PHP template, and the PHP template is rendered by the browser. No, sorry, rendered by the server and then sent to your browser, which means anytime you want to grab new content, you basically have to say, hey, server, can you render a new page for me? And then the server will cough up an HTML page and give it to you, which is a very good system for making persistent content on the web, meaning someone can go in and cache it and it'll be the same every time. But it's not a good system if you want to have any kind of dynamic behavior. So for example, you may have seen, I think it was last year or the year before, Time, the magazine, had this really cool site where they had the Time 100, so the 100 most important people in the world or something like that. And you would go into any one of them and you could scroll up or down, and then it would automatically load in the next person underneath. So you wouldn't actually load up 100 posts. Instead, you would load up one post, and then there's a JavaScript trigger that sits and monitors the page. And as you hit wherever that trigger is, it would then go and query the database and say, hey, can I have the next post? Now, what the API does is you can make those queries without running through a PHP template. So you're basically just going to the database and saying, hey, can you give me just the data in a standardized format, and then I will handle the data on my end. So what you end up doing is getting this JSON file, which is just a kind of XML type file with all the data, and then you can parse that through whatever you want, PHP or JavaScript or ASP.NET or Ruby or God knows what, and piece it together and make something come out of it. And that kind of gives you the idea of where this is going. So once you have a REST API on any kind of application, the data becomes divorced from the application itself, which means you can now build an Android app that pulls the data off a WordPress site without ever going into WordPress. You can build a WordPress site with WordPress on the back end and .NET on the front end, or whatever you want. So this focus that's in the community right now on everyone must learn JavaScript and how to use JavaScript frameworks is a very narrow part of what this tool will do. Because yeah, sure, you can build things with JavaScript frameworks, but that's not what the REST API is for. The REST API is for giving us the ability to access the data without having to use a template to do so. Right?
That makes perfect sense. So so what's been eliminated at the most granular level is the dependency on WordPress templates.
Yes.
So now you have the freedom and flexibility to use that data in any way you can possibly think of.
Yeah. So you could, for example, I'm building an example now, which is a very, very basic HTML page with some very basic CSS. And you can plot in any WordPress site URL, and then it'll cough up the first post from that WordPress site and give it to you in the same formatting. So it's basically like a reader. If you go to a WordPress site that's cluttered with, ads or horrible formatting or terrible, or there's something wrong with it, you can simply say, hey, can you give me that post? And then you'll get the post and you can slap your own formatting on top of it without ever really going to the site, which is insane if you think about it. But that's actually what the REST API does. It divorces the WordPress front end from the content. So you no longer need the front end to access the content.
That's a pretty beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a lot of conversation about using the REST API 2 for a better admin experience. Have you worked with that at all?
A little bit. It's the same thing, right? Because the admin experience is just an login-only front end for the database, right?
Right.
It's funny because the admin experience is also a front end of WordPress. There's a theme that makes the admin experience look the way it does, right?
And it's not a good thing.
Just data. So you could easily make a form field and then send the data back to the database. And the REST API with the right authentication allows you to do that. So the idea is sometime in the not too distant future, you should be able to make an entire WordPress site where if you log into the backend, you're no longer in WordPress, you're somewhere else. And if you log in, or if you look at it on the front end, you're no longer in WordPress. And you're just using WordPress as the engine that basically it's an interface layer between you, the human being, and the database on the other side.
That is, I cannot wait to see more examples of what's happening with that. So we have another guest with us tonight. Welcome, Brian.
Hello. How's everyone?
Want to introduce yourself?
I'd prefer that people just kind of guess who I am. No. So hello, I'm Brian. I run WPSessions.com. I work at Crowd Favorite as the director of technology, and I'm all around nonsense spreader on Twitter as Risen, RZEN, which you can see right there below my name. And I've heard of this WordPress thing. I'm a big fan. Also a big fan of the API stuff. Glad we're talking about that. And the idea of divorcing the content from the CMS, as Morten mentioned, I think is definitely the most profound thing that it does. And perhaps the last release should be known as the Great Divorce in WordPress.
Yeah, you should try to sell that to Matt. He'll totally go for it.
Yeah.
Should rename the whole thing.
The whole thing.
So have you worked with the REST API much yet, Brian?
I have a little bit. I gave a talk about it at WordCamp Ann Arbor towards the tail end of 2016, and I've been playing with it in a couple of different implementations at Crowd Favorite. Haven't done anything that I can really put out in the public yet, though, unfortunately. But the short answer is yes, and it's delightful.
It is truly magical when you start playing with it and you realize what it's doing, because there's all this. It's it's just like this big pile of data. And once you start looking at it and what you can actually accomplish by following links within the data and expanding on it, it opens possibilities that previously weren't visible to you. Because I think what happens with a tool like WordPress is you become very used to this standardized way of doing things, right? So everyone starts with a starter theme, either someone like underscores or something else, or they have their own starter theme. But that starter theme kind of gives you a template that you start with. Whereas the REST API just gives you, it barfs out data and it just goes, here is a ton of data. What do you want to do now, right? There's too much here. You need to parse this down and then figure out how to display it.
Yeah,
and that
by
automatically
itself,
makes you think about it differently.
the REST API alone is pretty meaningless, right? I was showing this off in my WordCamp talk. Like, here's what you get, and it's just a bunch of gobbledygook, basically. Like, this is great if you're a machine, but as a human, like, nobody wants to come and read your site if it's just being spit out in JSON. But you're right. It causes you to think about, what other things can I do with this data here? How can I draw out these relationships and present them in new or interesting ways? It causes you to kind of think about things, and like you said, from a new perspective. So on my site, for instance, showing training material, being able to immediately get back the relationships between the sessions and the speakers and the sponsors and the date in which it happened, and finding other things based on the taxonomy information. Like, all of this stuff is already available to me inside of WordPress, and I've put it in the templates, but it caused me to start thinking about different ways to browse the site based on how the data is linked together itself. And I haven't implemented any of this yet, unfortunately, but being able to jump from, say, from a session with a speaker to the speaker's page to see what all of the different things that they've instructed, similar in how you might browse WordPress.tv, right? You can get to someone's talk, you can see all the talks that they've done, keywords based on the topic they're giving, seeing other topics that share those keywords. It just causes you to think about the relational aspect of all the data on the site. Or it causes me, anyway. I don't know about everybody else. I shouldn't speak for the rest of the planet.
So you guys are both educators. So what's your advice for people who want to learn more about the REST API, the potential, the concept, and then what's out there in terms of hands-on learning?
A Day of REST Boston is coming up in a couple of months, and that's going to be pretty awesome. A Day of REST London from last year was fantastic. I got to attend that, and all of the talks were recorded and are online and available for viewing. So I would start there. That's about, I think it's 8 hours or 10 hours of material to comb through. Several of the topics were from people who contributed to creating the REST API. So they have a very informed perspective. And I've seen lots and lots of articles crop up on, here are things that you could start doing with it. Martin, what do you think?
Yeah, the other thing to remember is RESTful APIs is not new.
Yeah, and not only WordPress.
Outside of the WordPress community, RESTful APIs have been around for probably 10 years. And it's funny because I travel outside the WordPress island a lot. And people have always asked me why WordPress doesn't have a RESTful API, because everything else does. And when you start learning about how to use RESTful APIs, it is valuable to move outside the WordPress community and look at just how to use RESTful APIs. Because one of the important things to understand is the second you make a request to the REST API on WordPress, you're no longer working in WordPress at all. You're working with JSON. And that means anything that you know about WordPress is relatively irrelevant to what you're doing, because you're now just saying, hey, here's a bunch of data. I need to parse the data and put it onto something. And then I can follow these links or use these IDs and request things. The only times you encounter WordPress itself when you work with the REST APIs, if you want to alter the output of the REST API, like if you want to add a new custom post type in, or you want to add additional fields to the output or something else, then you would go into WordPress and probably build a plugin and then add some extra fields to it or something like that. But in all of the cases, you're just passing a URL, and the URL coughs back a huge JSON file, and then you do whatever you want with it. And the second you move outside of the WordPress space and look at what you can do with JSON files and REST APIs, you'll discover there's an enormous amount of data available, and it very quickly expands your understanding of what is possible on the web, because this is very new to us in the community. And as a result, we're kind of doing baby steps, whereas the rest of the larger community has been doing it for 10 years. So we're starting fresh, where there is a lot of data to what do you call it, harvest from elsewhere. So I would recommend looking at how to work with JSON data in different programming languages, understanding the consequences of making applications that are solely reliant on one technology, for example, JavaScript, and really understanding how to traverse data, how to bring in additional data, how to follow links and collate data and sort it, because everything is different when we work with a JSON file from what we're used to.
That's awesome. We're going to link up a bunch of these resources that we've been talking about in the show notes for you guys. But I think this is something that everybody should be really interested in, because, you know, the beauty of a content management system is really the data store and the relationships between the data store. And the more you can do with that, and the more you understand that, like if you think about WordPress in terms of, you know, a theme and hooks and functions, you're really limiting your possibilities, you know, for learning and understanding. Before I got involved with WordPress, we worked with lots of APIs in financial services, and would pull all kinds of data and, you know, projections with reinsurance and move billions of dollars of forecasts. And it's pretty cool to play with data like that. So it's something I really, really would encourage people to delve into. It's one of the things I want to do this year. What do you guys think are going to be the big themes and big interests this year? What are you interested in exploring and learning more about?
I think thesis is going to be a big theme. I think it'll make a comeback. Sorry.
Okay, I'm leaving. Goodbye.
Okay.
I think JavaScript is going to continue to be a big focus. It makes a lot of sense in terms of bringing interactivity back to a page, especially as more developers discover and start to interact with the REST API. Kadam White of Boku had a really great line. They discovered Boku does a lot of JavaScript-based work, not a whole lot of WordPress-based work. And as they were doing that, they realized they needed to build CMSs for their clients and stuff. And they quickly realized that with the inclusion of the REST API, WordPress was hands down the best JavaScript CMS out there, which is kind of funny in terms of giving their clients access to control things. So they started building a lot of sites with WordPress as the back end and not at all WordPress as the front end, just completely standalone JavaScript-based experience slurping up the data from the REST API. So I imagine, given core WordPress's focus on the REST API and the editor experience, and I've already forgotten the third one.
Editor and customizer.
Customizer, thank you. That we're going to see people continuing to shift towards JavaScript. I know I'm personally interested in going there. And I want to learn a lot about data modeling, and a lot about, I'm trying to remember what the other thing on my other big book on my reading list is. Well, we'll just data modeling. Data modeling is a big deal to get right, and that ties into how we're building objects in the code, how we're storing data to the database. So there's a big area that people have spent decades building knowledge on that I haven't yet tapped.
It's a fascinating subject.
Yeah.
So we have this kind of new world order, right? Where Matt is forming a marketing committee. So we had a decade, a little over a decade of, code is poetry. And kind of, in my opinion, code above all. All the emphasis has been on, development, code contributions. While WordPress has a great community, there hasn't been a culture around the other aspects of the spectrum, in my opinion, marketing or design or user interface excellence or those kind of things. So that's a really interesting change. And then we have this change in the development cycle, where you have, instead of set releases, 3 big areas of focus, and how all that's going to work and flow is kind of interesting. And I think in some ways you have this large body of ideas, and yet fundamentally you still have WordPress.org and WordPress.com, which I think is a really interesting topic to talk about.
That's like the thing that keeps popping up constantly on the internet.
WordPress. What now?
Yeah, exactly. So the first part first, I think what is it called? The Growth Council that Matt is proposing it's a good idea, because it looks at what we can do to get a firmer foothold on the web. And especially when you look at things like the announcement from Medium yesterday, where Medium put out this incredibly cryptic message about they are changing their format and their model, and and everyone read it and goes, what does this mean? And then they say at the bottom, we don't actually know what this means yet, but we're doing something. And you're like, okay, take all your stuff off Medium right now, because this might just disappear, right? The baseline premise of WordPress is that you control your data, that you set up your own site, you control your own data, you are in control of the whole experience. And selling that message to people in today's world, where a lot of crazy things are happening, is becoming really important. And the contrast to that is these other companies like Wix and Squarespace and everything that basically all have the same banner, which is, you want to need a website, why not build it yourself? And then they have these very simple to use interfaces where you can drag and drop and click around and make things that look decent, but the code behind it is just a total mess. People that are not in the web community need to learn what it is and what it means to have control of your own data, and what it means to put out proper, resilient code that lives on its own and is accessible and all these things. And WordPress is in a unique position to tell that story. The problem is WordPress doesn't have $30 million to spend on advertising. So the Growth Council is basically looking at, or is ostensibly supposed to look at, how do you answer that challenge, right? If someone else is pouring endless money into advertising and you don't have the money, how do you then tell the story? And I think we have tremendous opportunities to tell stories. We're just not doing it because we've been too busy focusing on just building the platform. And we've also been reluctant to actually pull stories out of the community and telling them outwards. Stories are being told internally in the community all the time, but no one outside really hears those stories. It's funny because, I don't know, do you watch, what's that show called? Silicon Valley? or they have that fake company Pied Piper, right? When they have that, there's like in season 1, they have this thing about how they're going to advertise Pied Piper. So they put posters everywhere that with like random people. That's just like a woman with a guitar and it says, "I am Pied Piper." And it doesn't make any sense because like it doesn't say anything about what it is. Honestly, you could do that with WordPress and it would work, because WordPress is the people who use it, right? So you could totally steal the Pied Piper logo and just say like, "I'm WordPress," and make a campaign, but a social-based campaign around it, right? And tell the stories of actual people who use WordPress, and not just the people like us who live and breathe the application, but the real people in the real world that we don't talk to, that are actually using WordPress to build their businesses, to build educational platforms, to do all these other things, right? So, but, you know, within that conversation, this is the crazy part. So WordPress as a self-hosted application is a fantastic tool that democratizes publishing, that lives on whatever server you put it, you have total control. And there's this other thing called WordPress.com, which is a proprietary platform that lives on a specific server base somewhere, and is entirely reliant on the people who run it. And in a very real sense, WordPress.com is not that different from Medium. The revenue model is similar. The reality is you don't have your content. It's sitting on someone else's server. You can export it all you want, and that's fine, but it's a company, right? And they might shutter for whatever bizarre reason, and then all that data would disappear, just like with any other company. So you don't have that same level of control. And yes, it's run by someone who really cares about democratizing publishing and really cares about giving people freedom. But that's one person and the people that are currently working in the company. If you think 10, 15, 20, 30 years ahead, things change in big companies, right? So I think moving forward, the conversation about what the difference is between WordPress and WordPress.com will become more and more pointed. And at some point, someone actually has to bring it up and say, why is it that there's this commercial company that operates in parallel to the open source platform and confuses the entire terminology around the platform? And why isn't this being dealt with in a proper manner?
The confusion, I think, is, I mean, if I were involved in the Growth Council, the confusion is the first thing. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is WordPress is easy. So WordPress has a lot going for it. Owning your own data, potential, buildability. Easy isn't really one of the things, based on my experience with what people perceive as easy. So Wix and Squarespace, you know, they're easy. That's great. Maybe not as easy as they're marketed to be. But there's so much that needs to happen with people in terms of, like, in the last few years, we've had this huge wave of people doing business online. So mm-hmm. they're building courses and they're selling things, and you know, they're opening e-commerce stores, and they're, you know, coaching and doing all these things. Like, I've seen a real shift in this segment where people are like, I'm going to get online and I'm going to, like, sell myself or sell my program or sell something. But there's also a huge shortcoming in that they're just kind of blowing around in the wind. You know, they heard that they want WordPress, WordPress.com, WordPress.org. What are they doing? You know, they end up in the wrong place. They don't have a great grasp of, you know, the elements involved, and then they end up in. So if there was a way, instead of saying it's easy, you know, if we said instead maybe that it's smart, you know, and here's why it's smart, and here's what you can do with that smartness. I don't know, that I feel like there has to be some kind of shift in the conversation. Like,
I like that.
Is selling easy really the answer?
It's definitely not. Selling, it's not easy. It's smart, I think, is the right approach. Because if you've never used a web publishing platform before, and even if you have, perhaps, WordPress isn't easy. It's best of breed, but there are a lot of different things you need to learn in order to use it effectively. And saying that it's smart implies a whole lot more than it's easy. Lots of things are easy, right? Getting a drink from the tap in your sink is easy. Opening your 7th can of Diet Coke for the day is easy, but it's not necessarily smart. So I have what might be an unpopular opinion. I don't know. I'm not too bothered by people being confused about WordPress.com and .org, because the people who are confused about it just lack exposure. They're not initiated. And it's a pretty easy distinction to make once you get into it. And for someone who's just getting started and learning the ropes, I think it's not a terrible idea to say, go to WordPress.com, kick the tires, and see what you like there. It's a hosted service. You'll be paying for that experience depending on what you want, but you'll also be paying for a self-hosted experience as well. And it's a little harder to just sell them that upfront, because WordPress.com has been making such a significant departure from the interface that all of us know from .org. But nevertheless, telling them, here's a site that has a bunch of ready-made designs and a bunch of common built-in functionality is a great way to say, go here, kick the tires, see what it's like to publish something on the internet, see if this is something that suits you. If it doesn't, step one is to see, is there someone you can work with where it does suit them? And then when you're ready to graduate to running your own site, controlling all of the stuff yourself, it's very easy for you, if you keep on using WordPress.com in the interim, to export that data and bring it with you as you go. You do run the risk, as Morten mentioned, of essentially selling your content to someone else. And while it's unlikely, certainly possible that WordPress.com could shutter its doors, could take your content hostage, I don't think that would happen, but I don't have that same level of reassurance as I do when I own everything soup to nuts. With backups, of course, because my web host could cease to exist overnight. And all of their backups could cease to exist as well. So it's important to maintain your own backups off-site. But nevertheless, I'm not too bothered by people's confusion. It's hard when you're selling them on, here's how to get started, and they don't even have that square one common ground to start from. So it does require a little bit of navigating as you're introducing someone to this concept of running a website. But once you're past that initial barrier of, this is something that someone owns, like Facebook or Medium, this is something that you run yourself, and when you run it yourself, you can do anything you want, whereas here you're stuck in someone's playground. That's a pretty easy concept for someone to pick up right away.
Well, I think what I've seen a little bit of is, I think that was valid a few years ago, like if publishing content, like if you fit in that category of a content publisher, but more and more people today are coming to the party for the first time, with the idea of they're going to have a membership site, they're going to have drip email campaigns. They're going to have more complex things that they learned about in Facebook groups and courses that they bought in different things. So they go through this experience, they buy the course, or they join a group, or how to market your way to 6 figures, and then they're ready to take action. And they are put in a weird place, I think, because they know they want to take action with WordPress. they have that
because it's smart.
out. WordPress is best. But what does that mean? Oh, well, here's WordPress. and then it's like, well, this doesn't do any of the things that I thought it would do. So I don't know. I just think there has to be some way to help educate people more. Like there's a difference between publishing, which is a really valid thing, with Medium. There's, WordPress.com, there's great venues for publishing. Maybe helping people understand that running a business for money is one of the distinctions, where you need to approach it a little differently, think a little differently, plan a little different. I'm not sure, but I get an increasing amount of, it's not just WordPress.com confusion, but I think of it as like magic WordPress, right? Give me some magic WordPress and I'm going to make 6 figures in 2017. It's like, all I need to do are install these 37 plugins. And I mean, baby, we're going to rock. It's like,
yeah, that's actually a remnant from a long time ago. So I remember when I started getting involved with WordPress specifically, this was back in 2006, 2007, something like that. When I started using it, that was during that blogger thing was happening where people realized, oh my God, I can actually earn money online just by writing stuff and putting ads on it. And then people will actually generate money. And I have a friend who at the time made this bold claim that within the year, he would be able to quit his job because he would earn enough money on the blog to not work. And now he earns obscene amounts of money. Like he's a multi-millionaire based on his blog, which is just a blog about how to earn money on the internet by telling other people how to earn money on the internet. It's totally like ridiculous shell game. And he openly admits it, that this is like the only reason why this works is because he was the first to do it. So, and no one else can do it than him, and everyone keeps trying to compete with him. So they put ads on his site for their own sites about how to make money online. And he earns tons of money off those people. So it's one of those, we, the overall web community, have done a terrible disservice to the people who use the web in that we've completely misrepresented what the web is and how it works. So instead of telling people this is a publishing platform, it requires heavy involvement from you. You probably need to bring in an expert to do this because you're running a business and the website is a supporting agent to your business. So unless your business is the website itself, then you need expertise to run it properly. Now, if you think about any other kind of business, you see how crazy it is. It's like if you are a car dealership or a car repair shop, right? Your income is the car repair shop, not the website. The website will maybe generate more people coming into your car shop, but if you spend all your time maintaining the website and writing the blog, you're not doing your job, you're doing a different job. So then you're all of a sudden a web maintainer. Now, what we're trying to do is build solutions that make that process as simple as possible. But I think we're doing people a disservice by telling them that they should do it themselves. I honestly think we've gone way too far in the whole, this is DIY, anyone can do it. And we're chasing that rabbit constantly, trying to make it easier because all these competitors are doing the same thing. So they're saying, need a website for your business? Why not do it yourself? The correct answer is, need a website for your business? Don't do it yourself. That's a bad idea, right? But that doesn't sell.
I could not agree more.
Need a brake change? Do it yourself.
This is just the core problem right here.
But we're doing this. Like, we as WordPress, we're doing the same thing. We're criticizing other people for doing it, and then we're doing the exact same thing ourselves. And unless we start, like, we're in a position where we can have this conversation with people, tell them this is not some sort of easy one-click install that will automatically generate money for you. This is not something that you can spend 5 minutes on, it'll work, unless you're building something incredibly simple, like just a blog. If you're building just a blog, it takes 5 minutes. You can do it. It's easy. Just click some buttons. Everything will work. Just write your content. Everything's fine. Beyond that, it's no longer just something you should do on your own. You need to bring in an expert, just like you would if you need to clean your teeth, right? If you want to clean your teeth, You can take your toothbrush and clean your teeth. You can do that on your own. Fine. That's not a problem. If you need anything more extensive, you don't buy the equipment and do it yourself. I don't think any dentists clean their own teeth with machines.
This idea of publishing, blogging, however you want to look at that, and then business. Those are two different things. I just went through quite a process with someone who did this, right? Took the courses and DIY to the extreme level, and ended up with a website that had hundreds and hundreds of pages, no posts, navigation that had 360 links in it, arranged in drop downs.
It's amazing.
Huge plugins.
Was this an art installation? Something to come in Marvel?
It was, and so when I started working with the site, didn't really load completely ever.
Sounds very.
There are so many problems. I mean, like as somebody who does this for a living, you can look at this. It's like going to a house, right? You go to this house that's sliding into a sinkhole, and you say, okay, wow, we really need to take a complete step back, look at your foundation, how this is all structured, and meanwhile, the person is 90 miles an hour toward, selling products. And it's like, how do I help you understand that if your site does not load, just as one example, there are no clear navigation paths, there's, all these problems. Like, how do I help you understand that you will not, sell? You won't sell things. And if you do sell things and people have this experience, they're going to want their money back. You just can't, and it's become so pervasive, of just, and this is literally the sequence, right? Get a, cheap hosting account, install WordPress, install a popular theme framework, and just, go to town. Buy every premium plugin, install every plugin on the top 37, plugins you need on your site list, and just, more is better. And it was really the first time that I dug that deep into a site where somebody had done that and really honestly wasn't able to turn around. Like, person is not, a convert to my way of thinking.
Yeah. So you guys have said a lot of thought-provoking things here first. First, I'm talking without punctuation again. Going back to the billionaire blogger sell people on the idea of selling things to other people reminds me a lot of a business model that my friends and I came up with in high school. It was the Academy of Training Trains of Monkeys, Trained to Train Monkey Training Monkeys University, or ATT-MTT-MTMU.
Awesome.
Where you just train monkeys to train other monkeys who can then train, and it just goes on and on and on and on. And all you got to do is train the first monkey and they do the rest. And it's funny how easy it is when you're the first one to market to say, look, here's how you can set up shop and teach other people how to set up shop, where you're selling people this reality that they are sure exists and they want to live in, if only they knew how. And to the selling people a disservice by telling the do-it-yourself, that was my mantra back in college. I always got frustrated with my friends who were in art class or who were in teaching classes And in the art class, they were being told, you have to design and build your own website to show off your art portfolio. Like, absolutely not. Do you want to do this the rest of your life, or do you want to create art the rest of your life?
Mm-hmm.
You should outsource that junk right away and just keep making art. And then to my teachers, they're being taught, like, make a brochure to sell yourself. Like, are you in the profession of design? Do you understand sales and marketing? No, you should be teaching. You should talk to someone who can do those things to design the brochure for you. And then have these, what I thought, asinine assignments. So I, the photo major, would sit down with them and design them a brochure and help them find a ready-made art portfolio template to just load up their content and get the assignment out of the way to get back to what they were doing. And somewhere along the way, I kind of forgot that I had the passion to do that. And I'm now, like Morten said, part of the problem of, come on, learn how to use WordPress and build websites. Except my intended audience is not the person who runs a repair shop, is not the car dealer, who are wise enough to know, I'm busy doing this thing that I actually enjoy. I'm going to pay someone else to do this other thing. My intended audience are the people who hate what they're doing, want to do something more fulfilling, and perhaps web development is that. Perhaps it's not. And ideally, I can help them figure that out very quickly without them having to go instead spend lots of money at a university or somewhere else.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the biggest challenges WordPress faces, is we're targeting very different audiences. There's basically 3 levels, right? So you have the average WordPress user, and I would venture a guess that probably about 80 to 90% of all WordPress websites in the world are this type of user, people who publish content online in some form of blog format. They're the ones that use WordPress for what WordPress was originally intended to be used for. You say, I have an idea, plunk it onto the internet, that's it, right? Leave comments. That's the majority of WordPress users. Then you have the business case, which is the people who use WordPress to run some form of business. And this ranges all the way from basic site for some sort of small business where they're just putting up a calendar, or it could be like a dance studio, or I don't know, something similar, all the way through e-commerce to something where the majority of the business lives on the website. Then you have this tiny, tiny, tiny little group at the very top, which is the people who build websites for a living. So developers, designers, and everyone else, and they have entirely different requirements from everyone else. Now, the challenge that I think we have is that the people who build WordPress is that top part, right? The 0.1% of the people who use WordPress. And the application is being built by the people who are basically an irrelevant portion of the total user base, and they don't have any connection to the actual people who use WordPress every day. And we're trying to target the application at all these other types of users, but they actually need different applications. They don't require the same thing. Like I had a conversation today with someone higher up in the hierarchy than me in the development system about the REST API, because I accidentally wrote a script that recursively would call every single endpoint in the REST API, and it brought down my internet connection and eventually my computer. And I'm sure the server I was pinging was like, what the hell? It's a DDoS attack from one computer, because the opening the doors to something like that on a website without any reasonable limits can cause huge problems. Now, the majority of people who use WordPress right now have no use for the REST API. The REST API will only become relevant to them when something in core starts using REST API, or if they activate a theme or a plugin that relies on it. So shipping that feature turned on to all WordPress sites doesn't really make any sense. It makes sense from a developer standpoint, but it doesn't make any sense for a user, because the average user of WordPress has no use for the REST API currently. There's nothing on the web that utilizes the REST API in such a way that they will have benefit from running it on their server. And a lot of the decisions that are being made because it benefits either the developers or benefits the people who are building very, very complex things, which is fine. But then we have to be honest and say that, right? Then we're targeting that audience, and the blog component becomes a secondary element. If we're trying to just pretend like we're targeting everyone all the time, we're not actually doing anyone any favors. We're just being very confusing.
Good at being very confusing.
Mm-hmm. But we can't be. It's irresponsible, and it doesn't help us bring forth the message of democratizing publishing online.
That's true. I'm also very irresponsible, so I'm a bad poster child here. I agree with everything you said. I just can't help but be sarcastic 98% of the time. You're right. It's an interesting thing to think about. I was a very big proponent of getting the REST API into core until I saw a couple of dissenting opinions about, is this actually the best thing for the REST API and for general WordPress users? And eventually I came around to, yes, I think it is, but there were lots of good arguments presented against it. And I think having it in core, it was a chicken and egg scenario, right? Like, will we get, do we need the API in core to get the things that will use it to propel us forward and make more interesting solutions? Or do we need to make more interesting solutions to therefore justify having it in core? And I think too many developers are fickle and aren't going to want to build super useful if step one is instructing their non-technical audience to go install this plugin on your self-hosted WordPress site.
I have kind of a rookie question. What are the arguments for and against the REST API being in core as opposed to being a plugin? So I've heard both sides of this. That development and innovation with the API might be slower now that it's in core, and it creates some burdens. And so what is the logic here? Like, why would it potentially have stayed independent? Or I think Matt said even, it wouldn't necessarily stay in core if it didn't. But I'm just not clear on that whole thought process.
So the argument that was made for keeping it, or one of the arguments that was made for keeping it a separate plugin early on, was that basically you're opening the gates to something no one is using, right? It's what Brian was talking about, that if no one is using the application, why on earth is it there? It's using resources. It opens a new path into the system. For instance, it makes scraping a website much easier than it was before. So go into the website, strip all the content out of it, and put it somewhere else. So if no one is using it, it has no place in core, right? The counter argument is, the reason why no one is using it is because it's not there. So if you're building a theme, you don't want to build a theme and then say, oh, by the way, to be able to use this theme, you have to go install this plugin, and then it becomes really challenging. The thing that it kept, there were many different things that held up the REST API getting into core. One of the last things that was holding it up was simply a disagreement between the team and Matt over how many endpoints were to be available. So Matt wanted the REST API to ship with all the admin endpoints activated, meaning you should be able to replace the admin experience, so the backend of WordPress, with the REST API when it's in core. Whereas the development team was more on the side of, we'll ship it with the endpoints we have right now, and then we'll add more later. So it's like a philosophical discussion about, when is something ready to ship? Is it only ready to ship when it's actually complete? Or is it ready to ship when it works? And then you can extend it later. At this moment, I think it's close to what the definition of complete would be, but there's still work to be done on it. But at least it works properly, and you gain access to most of the features that you would, both for the front and the back end. Now, the interesting conundrum that you end up with is there any reason to have a feature in core if no one is using it, right? And the argument that was made was, no one is using it because it's not in core. So there you have that chicken and egg thing, right? What do you do if no one's using it? You can't ship it as a plugin because not enough people are adopting it as a plugin. No one's really investing any time in it because they don't see the true value in it, because they can't ship things to their people. But at the same time, you had a bunch of companies outside of the WordPress community that were building REST APIs for WordPress because there was no REST API. So before the REST API was in core, there were a bunch of other REST APIs available for WordPress that were trying to solve the same problem. So the WordPress core needs a REST API. It's required because that's where the web is heading. Everything on the web is becoming API based. My argument is just the REST API should be turned off by default. And then when you activate something that uses it, it should toggle on. So that if there's nothing on the website that's using the REST API, it just shouldn't sit there, because then other people with malicious intent can go in and use it, right? So it should just be disabled until you actively use it in some fashion, either by hooking into it through a plugin or a theme or an app or something else, just to protect the millions of Hello World WordPress sites that have nothing but a Hello World post that can be used basically as some sort of DDoS boss based on the REST API. So no one has ever released an API of this scale on the web before, because this is not a single API. This is an API in each individual WordPress site in the entire world. This is an unprecedented project that has never been done before, and no one really knows the consequences of it. And no one is willing to have the conversations about what that entails in public, right? So there's a lot of unknown unknowns. Isn't that what it's called? Yes, unknown unknowns.
Yes, unknown unknowns. We don't know what we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I certainly learned some new things tonight, which I'm pretty excited about. But we're at the end of our time, so I thought maybe each of you could share what you've got coming up in terms of classes, courses. What's going on with WP Sessions, Brian?
Oh, good timing. I have a bunch of new speakers coming on this year. Things were pretty quiet in 2016 because I was doing a lot of contract work and ramping up into my current role at Crowd Favorite, and also trying a few things behind the scenes, like entire team-based training, which I piloted to much success last summer. But I'm finally coming back to the public live broadcast sessions. I've lined up 24 speakers so far for this year. So that's one every 2 weeks on average. And this month, we've got Kyle Maurer coming to talk about troubleshooting like a pro. And then the week after that, a gentleman named Ben Cool. That's his real name. It's awesome. He's going to be talking about understanding the database. So this big amorphous thing that hangs out in the background of WordPress that a lot of people don't really spend a whole lot of time thinking about, he wants to bring to the forefront and explain why we should probably care a little bit more about what it's doing, how data is getting stored. So I'm very excited about both of those sessions.
So tell folks where to go.
WPSessions.com. They'll be free to watch live. Every live broadcast is free. And if you miss it, it's just $9 for the recording.
And it's pretty awesome.
I enjoy it.
I have taken several classes. So Morten, tell us what you've got coming up.
Oh, there's always stuff coming.
Always, I know.
In the pipeline, there's a ton of courses either in production or past production that are being released. There's a new version of my building themes from scratch using underscores course that will come out probably in a month or two, depending on editing. I have a new theme coming out to link up to that course, because when I make the course, you build the theme in the course, and then I release the full version of the theme into the theme repository so people can go in and see what it looks like when it's all built out and complete. This year, I'm releasing several courses on the API, mainly focused on, like I said in the beginning, building persistent web applications. That means applications that don't rely exclusively on JavaScript to work. So they're not these shadow DOM things that just live if your JavaScript is running. They will load up content in the browser, and then use the REST API to load additional content if JavaScript is available. So it's a bit of a different approach from a lot of the things that people are talking about, because I'm deeply concerned about the persistency of content on the web. If you want to see what I'm talking about, you should go read a book called Resilient Web Design by Jeremy Keith. It's a very short web-based book that tells the story of the web. And it brings up this point of, if you build a web page that only exists in the shadow DOM on your computer, then it can't be archived. So anything published on a site that is a single page application is unarchivable. That means in the future, if the site goes down, that content does not exist. You can see it if you go to the Internet Archive and you go to things like Facebook, that as a single page application, there's nothing there. It's just a blank page, or it's a page with just filler content. And as our community moves very aggressively towards JavaScript, this is a conversation that no one's having. So in my courses on LinkedIn Learning, that will be that will be the baseline to build resilient applications that use JavaScript as an extension rather than use it as the baseline. Other than that, I'm hopefully going to be able to go to a couple of camps. Have a newborn baby. Well, he's not a newborn anymore. He's like 4 months old now. But it's very time-consuming to have this mini human that demands all sorts of things and has it's really random behavior. So it's taking a lot of time. Just there.
They do tend to take a lot of time.
It's like a self-learning computer. I have to say, after having a baby in the house, basically has explained to me why people think they can build self-learning robots. Because when you watch a baby try to figure out how to work, you're like, oh yeah, this is basically very advanced computing, and I can see how programmers would think this is something that we can duplicate. But that's.
I look forward for your LinkedIn Learning course on raising a 4-month-old.
Yes, that's going to be very interesting.
Learning AI through the eyes of a 4-month-old.
Wear only black clothes because there's but I have a bunch of courses coming out. I'm moving into web standards too, so there's a bunch of things that are tangential to this. I'm doing a huge course on JavaScript, an intro course to JavaScript a little later on the summer or in the spring, and doing some stuff on CSS Grid and other fancy new CSS things. So a lot of interesting things coming up.
And where's the best place for people to stay up to date on what you've got going on?
So there are two places. You can either go to your LinkedIn account, and then up in the right-hand corner, there's a button that says Learning on it. You just click on that. You go to LinkedIn Learning. That's all our courses are available there. You can buy access to that through your LinkedIn account. Then you get LinkedIn Pro plus a bunch of other stuff. Or you can go to lynda.com. Same thing. Same exact courses, just 2 different platforms. And you get all the same content just under the Lynda platform. So whatever color you prefer, I guess, blue or yellow, and then but it's the exact same content. And we have a lot of my new courses use the Learn to Code platform, which allows you to write code in the IDE in the browser while you're following the course and pulls in data. It's a lot of neat stuff. So Lynda or LinkedIn, your choice.
It's awesome. Okay, everybody, you can never get enough office hours, so you should go over to Office Hours FM, check out the previous episode archives. You can subscribe for updates. We've got a nicely growing Slack channel built around Office Hours where we're, sharing and collaborating and learning together. So we'll have a new episode for you on Monday. So check back in.
An Epic Troll by Diane Kinney.